And now I invite the next session official to take over. The moderator for the next session is Dr. Chandrima Paul. I request her to take over the next session with the chairpersons, Dr. Andrew Braganza, Dr. Meenakshi Yadav Dar, Dr. Gursatinder Singh, and Dr. Manodev Singh. So over to you, Dr. Chandrima.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amit. And we go ahead straight with the session. Very warm welcome to the chairpersons, conveners. And I think we'll start with the first talk in the interest of time and carry on with the talks and do the discussion right at the end. So the first talk this afternoon is Dr. Partha Mondal. Dr. Partha, are you here? Dr. Partha, I can see you. Please unmute yourself and share your screen. Dr. Partha would be speaking on overview of glaucoma drugs, indications, contraindications, dosage first time versus second time, initiating therapy.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah. At the outset, I would like to thank AIOS Scientific Committee for giving me this opportunity to share my thought process regarding the medical therapy of the glaucoma. Actually, when we think about any cases related to suspicion of glaucoma, our thought wheel is worked like this. First, we need to find out whether to treat or not. And then if we think that we need to treat this patient, set the target intraocular pressure, following that, the which modality to start with. And whenever the IOP is achieving target intraocular pressure, whether there is any need of change of plan. So to think of the which medicine to start with, we always think of the medicine which is maximum effective and reasonable amount of safety and the tolerable to the patient. At the same time, the dosing schedule should be convenient to the patient. Which drug to start with, we need to consider 4 things. One is the type of glaucoma, age of the patient, if the patient is having any systemic disease, and the ocular condition. Considering the type of glaucoma, like if the patient is having NTG, normal tension glaucoma, we like to prefer bitoxolol rather than the timolol. In case of uveitic glaucoma, the pilocarpine is contraindicated, and the prostaglandin is controversial. Probably we will not think about the first line medicine as prostaglandin. In case of neovascular or traumatic glaucoma, the pilocarpine is better to be avoided. And in angle closure glaucoma, we usually avoid brimonidine because it has got some pupil dilating effect. In age of the patient, the pilocarpine is not preferable in younger patient. Beta blocker is contraindicated in the neonates because of the apnea. Beta blocker is not preferable in the young male, probably thinking about the loss of libido as a side effect. Brimonidine is contraindicated in children because of the psychotic effect. If the patient is already using antipsychotic medications, brimonidine is contraindicated. Even the patient is having asthma, we can think of bitoxolol, but it still has some risk. If the patient is already on beta blocker, sometimes the beta blocker, topical beta blocker also works well. In ocular condition, pilocarpine should be avoided in myopia. And if the patient is already having viral keratitis or the past history of viral keratitis, it is better to avoid prostaglandin. Always we think of initial monotherapy, whatever be the intraocular pressure, but in case of the high intraocular pressure, we want to combine with short course of oral acetazolamide to take down the pressure so that the drug penetration improves. If we start a monotherapy, there may be 3 conditions that we can have 3 conditions. One, with initial monotherapy, the IOP is at target level, or initial monotherapy has got some satisfactory reduction, but we cannot achieve the target intraocular pressure. And sometimes the poor response of initial monotherapy or the therapy is not well tolerated by the patient. If the IOP is at the target level, definitely stay on the initial monotherapy. But in case of satisfactory reduction, but not achieving target intraocular pressure or poor response, we can think of second medicines or switch to another monotherapy. But to know whether there is satisfactory reduction or the poor response, we need to know the efficacy of each drug. Like beta blockers 20 to 25%, pilocarpine 20 to 25%, prostaglandin is also about 25 to 30%. So we need to know the efficacy, average efficacy of all the medications. Like if the patient is having 29 millimeter of mercury pressure, and if we set the target as 20 millimeter of mercury, if we start with bimethoprost, the IOP achieved up to 20 millimeter mercury. So the IOP achieved at the target level, we will be on the initial monotherapy and continue the initial monotherapy. But if we initiate beta blockers, the intraocular pressure from 29 came down to 22. It's almost 7 millimeter, but it's not giving the proper, it's giving the proper reduction like 20 to 25%, almost 6 or more than millimeter of mercury. So it has got satisfactory reduction, but still not achieving target intraocular pressure. So we will think of adding a second agent. But if we think that we initiate with the beta blocker and from 29, the intraocular pressure came down to 26, just 3 millimeter, it has got not the proper efficacy. And in this case, probably I will think that the poor response with the beta blocker. So we can think of switching to another monotherapy. This is the thought process we usually work with, but always keep in mind to compare the efficacy call at the same time of the day. The patient should be called at the same time of the day. Some points, if we add drugs with different, add any drugs, we always think of adding drugs with different mechanism. Like if we add beta blocker, something else, then definitely it is better to add something prostamide or prostaglandin rather than carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. So this is just the addition. Always think that efficacy is lower when added than the individual monotherapy, and combined formulation is preferable than separate medications. If addition is not effective, then substitute the second medication, not the first medications. And consider always washout period. What is washout period? You should always know the washout period of each and every medication. So to get the efficacy of the another medications, you need to call the patient after the washout period being over. In case of the fixed dose combination rather than the variable dose combination, fixed dose combination means same bottle, multiple medications as opposed to different medications. The benefits are many, like avoidance of potential for washout of the first drug, reduce the number of the eye drops, and low cost, as well as the reduced exposure to preservative. But always think of the fixed dose combination may be less efficacious than having the lower side effects. The other 2 points, like dorzolamide timolol fixed dose combination provides better 24 hours efficacy than brimonidine timolol. And the another point is, in case of the brinzolamide brimonidine combination, it is non-inferior to the separate medications. Considering the genetic versus branded, 2 points to highlight. A study with the latanoprost, intraocular pressure lowering effect of the brand name drug is better than corresponding generic drug. But this is probably because of the adjuvant, because the stability of the active ingredients changes, pH changes. So probably the efficacy is related to that. The newer medications, there are 3 I just want to highlight. One is the latanoprostin Bunod. The another is combination of latanoprostin Bunod and the prostaglandin derivatives, and netarsudil. Latanoprostin Bunod is a nitric oxide donating PG analog, thereby increasing the trabecular meshwork facility of outflow. In combination with the latanoprostin Bunod, the prostaglandin increases the uvascular outflow, so the combined effect is better. Netarsudil is a Rho kinase inhibitor, and it decreases the intraocular pressure by increasing trabecular meshwork outflow, decreasing episcleral venous pressure, as well as decreasing aqueous humor production. Few points just to add, that the combination of effectiveness and the tolerability of prostaglandin derivatives becomes the most popular first choice drug. Pilocarpine still play a significant role in specific types of glaucoma, and with careful monitoring, you can use beta blocker even in the cardiopulmonary conditions. And the patient compliance should be always assessed prior to switching or adding new therapy. There are some common issues I want to highlight. First line drug, it can be beta blocker, prostaglandin, but pilocarpine always in case of the acute ACG. Considering the beta blocker, we can use timolol or betaxolol, but timolol is more efficacious than betaxolol, and the dosing schedule of timolol once daily is equal to twice daily dosing schedule. In case of the alpha agonist, probably we use mostly on brimonidine. It can be both BID and TID dose with equal efficacy. In case of the hyperosmotics, except the mannitol, we also use the oral glycerol. Mannitol, always you need to keep it, give it rapidly within 30 minutes to get the maximum effect. And at the same time, just you should restrict the oral fluids. Glycerol for longer use, but it less efficacious than the mannitol and less cardiac overload and unpalatable. So you need to mix with the fruit juice, and special caution in diabetes. Prostaglandin, considering the latanoprost and bimatoprost, bimatoprost may have better efficacy, but it has having the more side effects. The preservation, as we know, latanoprost need refrigeration, but bimatoprost no need. In Indian latanoprost, efficacy is lower than Xalatan and no need of refrigeration after opening. Single dose vial, always patient ask how long to use. I always tell them that they can use continuously as long as the vial persists. These are the thought process I just want to share with you. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Partho. That was an excellent and informative talk. And I'll move on with my talk. So I'll share my screen. My talk is on target IOP and factors to be taken into account. So the importance of intraocular pressure. Intraocular pressure is the main risk factor for the development and progression of glaucoma. We all know that, and lowering intraocular pressure decreases the risk of progression, and protective effect of IOP is dose dependent. All stages of glaucoma, starting from ocular hypertension to early and advanced glaucoma, benefit from intraocular pressure lowering. Target IOP, as defined by the American Academy, is the goal of treatment to maintain the IOP within a range at which visual field is unlikely to substantially reduce the patient's health-related quality of life over his lifetime. The estimated upper limit of this range is considered the target pressure. The European Glaucoma Society said the estimate of the mean IOP obtained with treatment that is expected to prevent further glaucomatous damage, an individual dynamic and modifiable parameter. If glaucomatous damage occurs under IOPs that are below the initially determined target, this target needs to be further reduced. So the rationale for target IOP is the only modifiable risk factor that affects the progression of glaucoma. Different individuals respond differently to the same level of IOP and necessity to establish a target IOP for each and every patient. So target IOP depends upon IOP at which damage has occurred, severity of visual field damage, rate of progression of damage, and the age and life expectancy of the patient. Central corneal thickness. So as we all know that the normal cecity is about 520 microns, and underestimation and overestimation occurs. As you see in the graph there, it's about 70 microns change in cecity corresponds to 5 millimeters of IOP difference. So the factors influencing target IOP: severity of disease, the extent of visual field damage, fixation threat. The more severe, the lower the target IOP. You have to consider the life of the patient, life expectancy, and the rate of retinal ganglion cell loss, the physiological loss of retinal ganglion cells with age. Glaucoma accelerates the loss. The variable, slow in most patients but fast in a few, and first progressors must be identified and treated aggressively. As you see in that graph there, somebody whose progression is like this needs to have a lower target pressure than somebody whose progression is on this line. So the target IOP in ocular hypertension, it's anything between 20 or more percentage that you need reduction. That's about 16 to 20 the range. And in early glaucoma, about 30%, that's 14 to 18 the range. In advanced glaucoma, about 40%, that's about 12 to 16. And where visual field and optic nerve photos indicating progression since therapy, so additional another 15%, which brings down to about 10 to 14%. So factors influencing target IOP is baseline, important to detect the IOP at which the glaucomatous damage occurred. And the lower the baseline IOP, the lower should be the target IOP. So the central corneal thickness, I just told you about it. It is a predictor for glaucoma conversion, as we saw in the OATH study. And it's unclear if it is a risk factor per se, basically. So the consequent of CCT on IOP measurement still has not been given very properly. So unclear if it should be considered in determining IOP. Corneal hysteresis, however, is more prone to progression. So the factors which influence intraocular pressure, you can see starting from sex right down to a lot of things that are there which influence intraocular pressure. So it is a difficult thing to set a target IOP actually. As we know, it's your race which makes a difference. African Americans show a higher prevalence of glaucoma than the Caucasians, and associated ocular and systemic disease like pseudoexfoliation, systemic hypertension, antihypertensive medications, these all contribute to the intraocular pressure. And when we do it, we have to weigh the risk benefit of the treatment, the impact of treatment on the quality of life. If you see that IOP actually is such a variable in resistance training, look at the graph. Walking and cycling, meditation and yoga and alcohol consumption brings down the intraocular pressure. So worst times of the day for your IOP is at night when you're sleeping. And so what we measure in the office is actually the lowest IOP. And then you have to be careful at what gaze you're measuring the IOP, because if you look at that graph by Van Reb et al., you would see that if you're measuring in the upper gaze, that's where the IOP reaches. And you're measuring in the lower gaze, that's where the IOP reaches. So to get the optimum IOP, you've got to ask the patient to look straight. Influence of body position on IOP. Look at the scatter graph out there as well. And the relationship between IOP and risk progression. So these are the different studies which showed the risk progression 10 to 13, 10%, 12%, and 19% with the hazard ratios. So overall, we take a 10% risk reduction for every 1 millimeter of IOP lowering. So we know that the variable IOP can actually go from 5 millimeters of mercury to 12 millimeters of mercury, depending on the visit and the time that you're taking the IOP. And as we know, the nocturnal IOP is always higher. I just told you about it, than the diurnal IOPs, which we take at the office. So IOP, if you take it as a global risk factor, it has about 63% percentage of patients who progress actually if the IOP is more than 22 millimeters of mercury. And making sense of IOP fluctuations is a very interesting thing, because IOP behavior at specific times on a given day does not provide a meaningful information regarding IOP at specific times on other days. And if you see that graph, the peaks of these three graphs actually are the troughs of these three graphs taken, say about 7,756 individual intraocular pressures for about 77 seconds. So these are various papers which actually talked about it. There's a seasonal variation at all shown by Van Reb et al. And the routine continual IOP monitoring improves management, enables sustained release treatments, improves adherence to medications, and a plethora of data we get from there. So this is an IMate which is on the process, which will take a continuous IOP reading so that we can arrive at better conclusions. So the challenges are long-term safety, reducing the size, big data interpretation, and of course, the money involved in it. So our thoughts and emotions actually influence our intraocular pressure. A small word about nocturnal hypotension. So patients who progress even with well-controlled pressures within the target range with the 24-hour blood pressure monitoring frequently have nocturnal hypotension. So low blood pressure coupled with high IOP in supine position compromises perfusion pressure. So it's better to use your medications taking into account this nocturnal hypertension, as beta blockers do not work very well at night. And of course, the blood pressure. So this is a little bit about the drugs, which Dr. Partha has also told you, and I've just told you as well. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that stage disease within the glaucoma continuum, assess all the risk factors, use risk factors to estimate global risk, weigh variables that impact treatment, establish treatment goals, and target therapy to appropriate the patient risk level. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll just stop sharing my screen. And the next speaker is Dr. Manavdeep Singh.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
And you see my slide also?
Yes.
So I'll go to slideshow. First of all, I thank the AIVS for this opportunity. And I thank Dr. Partha Mandal to have eased out me, because glaucoma is an arithmetical disease and all the things are similar. So in primary adult glaucoma, the basic treatment of primary upper angle glaucoma, is medical treatment. And in primary angle closure disease, it is after doing PI Same thing, just like primary adult glaucomas, primary open angle glaucoma. However, this is less responsive to the treatment, so the prescription has to be accordingly. This slide is been seen by everyone, and Dr. Chandrima has talked about this a lot, about the target pressure, so I'll skip this. The components of a rational therapy includes the right medication. In combination, if it is there, then it's the right combination, the right dosage, which is appropriate for the drug. It should be clearly mentioned. It should be written legibly or typed or in capital letters, and appropriate instructions for including the side effects should be given in a good prescription. And of course, one should never forget the affordability of the patient about the drug. So what is the right medication? We begin the therapy with a single dose with maximum efficacy and high compliance, reasonable cost. The PG analogs are the first line, as already discussed, and we need to assess the efficacy of the drug used. For this, we try to do a unilateral trial. So this is the algorithm which I follow, and which I recommend. So this is most important slide. We start with PG analogs, and if the target IOP achieved and the drug is well tolerated, we continue with the treatment. However, if the target IOP is achieved but drug is not tolerated, then we switch within the group because another drug may be better tolerated. And if the second drug is tolerated, then we continue with the treatment. And in case the target IOP is not achieved, then we again switch within the group, because efficacy within the group may also be different. Like we know that timolol is more effective than bitoxolol. And if the target IOP is still not achieved, then we see the amount of fall. If it is less than 20%, we change the group. And if the fall is more than 15%, then we add another drug. 15 to 20 is a gray zone, except for PG analogs, where the IOP fall should be minimum, it should be 20%. So if after having switched within the group, the drug is still not tolerated, then we again change the group. So this is the way we go. And the side effect profile, the side effects can be reduced by heart. In cases of heart block, depression, bronchospasm, or dry eyes, avoid beta blockers. And note that beta blockers are not contraindicated in ischemic heart disease and hypertension, rather they are the drug of choice. So this is a very much big misimpression among our residents. They say the patient is hypertensive, don't give beta blockers. So that's not true. In case there is inflammation in post-op cases or in cases of macular edema, we avoid pilocarpine and PG analogs. However, the ROCK inhibitors are the drugs of choice in these cases. In corneal endothelial problems, we do not prescribe carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. In NTG, PG analogs, ROCK inhibitors, and alpha agonists are the drugs of choice. Allergies are most common with brimonidine, and within PG analogs, we understand that tafloprost is the most innocuous, followed by latanoprost, travoprost, and bimatoprost in that order. So these are the things to be kept in mind while giving a prescription. The right combination, I think I should not go into these details. Use appropriate frequency and mention it clearly. OD, BD, QD may be different. Their meaning may be different. Like QD is what we call as OD in India, and QD is the same word for in USA. The appropriate instructions for the drugs should be given like this. The systemic drugs, the intravenous mannitol, the purpose is to bring down IOP in the range so that the drug becomes effective. For example, up to 40 millimeters of mercury in acute angle glaucoma, when the sphincter then starts responding to pilocarpine. What are the common pitfalls in these prescriptions? I have seen residents, if the IOP is 50 in a case of primary open glaucoma, and the patient comes to OPD for the first time, they give mannitol. This is not required. It's a very toxic drug, and most of the secondary glaucomas also, this is not required. Its use in non-seeing eyes is also not required, and it's a toxic drug, so monitoring should be done. And monitoring is for cardiac overload or pulmonary edema. It is not for BP. Generally, residents come and say, "Sir, hum BP dekh rahe hain." Oh, BP is not important. It's the cardiac overload which is important for this. And dose and speed, I think this has been discussed by Dr. Partha. The appropriate instructions with the systemic drugs in acetazolamide, it has to be given full stomach, inform the possible side effects, add juice, and in the diet, not essential to take the drug with the juice, which is a common pitfall again. coconut water is not as effective as mosmi juice. When we are giving potassium chloride, it should be given full stomach and it should be mixed in full glass of water, say 1.5 to 2 teaspoonfuls. It has to be mixed in full glass rather than taking 2 teaspoons and then drinking water. When we are prescribing glycerol, we have to give an instruction that no liquid should be taken 20 minutes before and after this. About the physiological state, Dr. Partha has already discussed. So I'll just say that physical, mental, and social condition of the patient should also be considered at the time of giving a prescription. So these are some of the prescriptions here. Timolol has been prescribed 4 times a day, which is not correct. Here, BE, ED, these things have been, abbreviations have been used and should be avoided. And here 2 PG analogs have been given in one prescription, and here glycerol is not written in appropriate dosage, and here these 2 circles and 3 circles are written in between 2 drugs, so it is not possible to understand what exactly is the thing. So as I said, the prescription should be typed or should be written in capital letters or should be written in very, very clear words. And it's very important to inform the side effects of the drugs, especially at the first prescription. And same is about the NLD occlusion and how to apply eye drops. Various videos are available on YouTube, including my own video on this regard. So these are some good prescriptions. This is a typed prescription with all the instructions given appropriately, and similarly, this is a handwritten prescription of the same kind. About the health.
Just 1 minute remaining, sir. A kind reminder.
Okay, fine. We must know the financial status, source of procurement of the medicines by the patient. Since the treatment is lifelong, we should discuss this thing with the patient and use affordable brands for poor patients or for anybody for that matter. And PG analogs, rest assured, are not expensive. In fact, if we use the generic drugs, and they're far more convenient to use. Keep note of the NGOs or the government support system for your poor patients so that you can guide them to use it, and do early surgery in case they cannot afford the drugs. So what is the maximal medical therapy? It's different from maximal tolerated medical therapy. Maximal medical therapy includes acetazolamide and maybe glycerol also, and this is generally used for short term and while waiting for surgery. Whereas maximum tolerated medical therapy includes what can be safely given over a long period to an individual without significant side effects. And generally 3 drugs in 2 bottles are considered appropriate. And
sorry to interrupt, sir, but the time is up. If you could conclude, we would really appreciate it, sir.
Sir, in this much time, I could have finished. Please don't disturb in between. In case you don't want, I'll stop that right here. Generally, 3 drugs in 2 bottles are sufficient, and every additional drug is less effective, as you should understand. And when nothing works, Pilo works. One should not forget this. Pilo is a very, very effective drug. So thus to summarize, medical management by mainstay is the mainstay of management of primary adult glaucomas, and stepwise treatment starting with a single dose with switch over and then add approach is the way to go. Treatment should be individualized considering the limitations of the patient, and treatment regime should be simple for best compliance. Prescription should be readable and understandable by the patient. Patient should be informed exactly about the frequency, method of use, side effects, and special precautions. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Manavdev. That was indeed a very informative and relevant talk. With that, we'll move on to the next speaker, Dr. Pankaj Rupalia, speaking on management of an acute IOP spike.
So first, can you hear me, Chandramadi?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So, sir, first you have to.
Yes, Dr. Manavdev, you need to, yeah. That's perfect. Yeah.
Dr. Chandrima, I definitely request you people not to disturb in between, because it doesn't take extra time. Everybody knows the responsibility. We are responsible.
Yeah, that's actually the hall management.
No, you just instruct them. I'll not make any presentations in future if this is behaved like this.
Dr. Amit to note. Dr. Amit is here. The scientific committee. Yeah, carry on, Dr. Pankaj.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to speak on acute IOP spike, no financial disclosure. Acute IOP spike is an ocular emergency because here patient presents with a severe pain, redness, diminution of vision, headache, and sometimes vomiting. So now, what's the type of glaucoma which can cause this acute IOP rise? In open angle glaucoma, we have a glaucomatous-cyclitic crisis, traumatic glaucoma, severe inflammation, and pigmentary glaucoma. Glaucomatous-cyclitic crisis, we know it's a Posner-Solomon syndrome. It's a uniocular involvement. There is a recurrent episode of mild cyclitis. Patient presents with a white eye, increased IOP, fine capes, and corneal edema. IOP is usually very high, and IOP is related to the duration of uveitis, not the degree of uveitis. Since it is a cyclitis, the treatment starts with the topical steroid, topical anti-glaucoma drugs, systemic and carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and avoid prostaglandin and pilocarpine. About the drugs, Dr. Manidip sir and Dr. Partha Mandal has said a lot of things about that, so I won't go in detail about that. And since it is a recurrent condition, topical NSAIDs are very important. So second entity is a traumatic glaucoma. Here, the rise of pressure is because of the clogging of trabecular meshwork, and glaucoma is more likely to develop with a total hyphema or after rebleed. The treatment starts with a topical steroid, topical anti-glaucoma drugs, systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and cycloplegics. And if medical treatment fails, then we do anterior chamber wash or hyphema drainage. Indication to do that if IOP is high for longer duration of time or corneal edema is there. Acute IOP rise with the closed angle. We know primary angle closer glaucoma. It happens in a narrow or closed anatomical angles eye, or even in a predisposed eye. If we do put the dilatation drops, we can cause the acute angle closer glaucoma. So before that, we should always do the gonioscopy before putting the drops. Acute angle closer glaucoma, Dr. Murli Arga said about this thing. It's where patient comes with a severe complaint of pain, redness, and all these problems. And when we examine the patient, we see severe corneal edema, dilated non-reactive vertical overpupil, ciliary congestion, shallow anterior chamber, more in the periphery than the center, and complete angle closure. The aim of the treatment is to reduce the IOP, suppress the inflammation, and reverse the angle closure. Drugs, we know already we have talked about topical beta blocker or Bimodin combination, topical steroid tablet acetazolamide, and pilocarpine to bring down the pupil. But mannitol, if nothing is working and if it's possible, we can give the mannitol, but that's what the reserve drug is. We don't give as a first step. But peripheral laser iridotomy is the final definitive treatment, and basically here to establish the communication between anterior and posterior chamber. But these patients may require anti-glaucoma medication, so we have to be very careful and have a long-term follow-up. Secondary angle closure glaucoma is mainly because of the mechanical closure of angle secondary to the posterior pushing mechanism, like in a phacomorphic glaucoma, it's a swelling lens is causing the problem, or in a malignant glaucoma, anterior displacement of the lens iris diaphragm is causing the problem. There are some drugs, systemic drugs like topiramate, it can cause these kinds of symptoms. So in a phacomorphic glaucoma, patients usually have a history of long-standing decreased vision, more common in small hyperopic eye, and patient present with all the signs of acute angle glaucoma like high IOP, mid-dilated pupil, corneal edema, shallow anterior chamber. And with that, there is an intumescent lenses there. So here the final treatment is a cataract surgery. To prepare a patient for the cataract surgery, we have to bring down the IOP, clear the cornea, and to start with, we have to start the anti-glaucoma drugs, steroids or antibiotic eye drops, and finally we do the cataract surgery. That's what the final treatment for the phacomorphic glaucoma is. Malignant glaucoma, aqueous misdirection syndrome. All of us are scared of this thing. Here, patient presents with a flat anterior chamber, central and periphery both, with increased intraocular pressure. Classical malignant glaucoma is reported to occur after the incisional surgery of our primary angle closure glaucoma. Mechanism is multifactorial. Basically, it is because of the anterior rotation of the ciliary body and forward movement of the lens iris diaphragm. The therapy, medical therapy starts with the cycloplegic is the mainstay of the treatment, and some patients may require long-term cycloplegics. We have to reduce the intraocular pressure with the topical anti-glaucoma medications and or oral tablet acetazolamide. Topical steroids are very important to reduce the inflammation, and in some cases, we might have to use osmotic agents. And if medical therapy fails, then laser therapy is the treatment we should try. There is a laser therapy, we try to restore a normal aqueous flow pattern by establishing a direct communication between the vitreous cavity and the anterior chamber. If laser therapy fails, then core vitrectomy is the answer. But whenever we are operating the other eye, we have to be very careful because this problem may happen in other eye too. There are some systemic drugs which causes non-pupillary block angle closure glaucoma, drugs like topiramate, sulfur drugs. these can cause non-pupillary block angle closure glaucoma. Here, patient presents with a bilateral acute angle closure glaucoma. There is a gross myopic shift, high IOP, angle is closed, and if you do the UBM, we get the shallow antechamber and supraciliary effusion. The treatment is IV mannitol if required, because pressure is very high in these cases. Control the IOP with anti-glaucoma medication, topical steroid and cycloplegics, not the pilocarpine. And most important thing is identify and discontinue the drug. In clinical practice, I get some patients with the acute IOP rise after the surgery, after the cataract surgery, if you have a retained viscoelastics, or more common I get with the vitreoretinal surgery, if we have a silicone oil in the AC. If we have a silicone oil in the AC, we have to do the AC wash, because otherwise these patient doesn't settle down. Pupillary block is also quite common after the vitreoretinal surgery, and we do the YAG-PI, and these patients, they tend to get the pupillary block, like PI used to get blocked in these patients, and some patients may need a repeat of the YAG-PI until silicone oil and all that thing settles down. To conclude, there is a proper diagnosis important for the correct management. Miotics can worsen the secondary angle glaucoma, so the proper medication should be used and drug should be decided on the, it depends on the disease. Topical steroid is important to control the inflammation, and all these patients need long-term follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. That was indeed very well brought out by you. So the next is a debate between branded and generic medicines. For branded speaking, Dr. Vikram Jain.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Vikram Jain, yes. 5 minutes.
Yes. Dr. Pankaj, if you could stop sharing your screen, I'll start my screen.
Ma'am, 4 minutes for each presentation, 2 minutes for discussion for the debate.
Yes, I'll finish in 4
Okay, 4 minutes for the presentation and then 2 minutes for discussion, right?
Yes, so as Dr. Chandrima has mentioned, I'll be talking on the side of the branded medications in glaucoma. So by branded, we have few differences. There are brand name drugs, which are the innovators, and we have branded generics. Most of what we use in India are branded generics, and true generics are the ones which do not come with any brand name. So I'll be talking against these true generics. Advantage is only the low cost. These are produced by companies with no cost of drug discovery. They just reverse engineer the known drug compounds. They do not have the cost of proving the safety and efficacy of these drugs through clinical trials. The main question about these generic drugs is the efficacy of these drugs. Legally, they have to be identical in strength, dosage, and the route of administration. And studies comparing the bioavailability are mandatory. Therapeutic efficiency is just assumed based on the bioavailability. But when it comes to ophthalmology, topical preparations are spared from this. We cannot really prove the bioavailability. So basically, if they have the same active ingredients in the same concentration, they are allowed to be sold. When it comes to glaucoma management, we should remember that this is a lifelong disease. We need the most efficacious with the least side effects, and cost should not be the only deciding factor. So to summarize, generic drops have the same strength, dosage, and route of administration. However, the inactive ingredients can vary. When it comes to latanoprost, the strength of the active drug is 0.005. That is 99.995% of the content of the bottle is something else, excipients. In all our glaucoma medications, it is 98% and above the quantity of the excipients. Now, these are the preservatives, the pH adjusters, buffers in it. They can impact the corneal penetration of the active substance, affect the retention time, as well as the tolerability. In the past, we had generic diclofenac, which was known to cause corneal melts. This was because just a solubilizer, vitamin E derivative, was of a wrong formulation in the inactive ingredient, and therefore caused that, and it had to be withdrawn from the market, not only by the smaller companies, but by big brand name companies also. In ophthalmology, again, the bottle may not be standard. The dropper size and composition of the material of the bottle also may have some interaction with the medication. Then you have this problem of generic drugstores, which may not have the same product each month, depending on their bidding, and they would stock medicines from the lowest bidder, and hence we don't know whether the efficacy will remain the same even within the compounds that they are dispensing. I have no financial interest in this talk, but what I would like to argue is about the efficacy and cost. And in our scenario, when most of our patients are diagnosed to have glaucoma, when they lose vision in one eye or when they come for a cataract, this is the scene in our country. They are well advanced when they present itself, and at that time we need a good efficacious drug, and therefore I would side towards the branded medications. To summarize, in ophthalmology, no lab-proven efficiency needs to be demonstrated to the drops. We do not know what the content of the excipients the generic pharma is using, and always remember, once damage occurs, it is irreversible. Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Amit Parwal and the scientific committee for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. We'll hear out Dr. Ashutosh Jaiswal on the other side of the bench, and then we'll go for a discussion of 4 minutes. So Dr. Ashutosh, please share your screen.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be sharing my PPT. I'll be talking in favor of generic medications. So first of all, MCI has made it mandatory in its regulations to write, every physician is supposed to write generic medications along with the brand names. So if it is not in the NLEM list, National List of Essential Medicines, then you are supposed to write the generic medications first, content first, and followed by the brand name. So as mentioned by Dr. Vikram, generic drugs are drugs which are manufactured after the company's patent is over or its rights are over. So which are, and they are available in 3 types. So in India, more than 90% medications are generic medications, and they are classified as promoted branded generics, which are usually prescribed by doctors, unpromoted trade generics, which are delivered at counters, and generic generics, so which are yet to be like in the flow, and they are 70 to 85% cheaper than the branded patented drugs. So I'd like to focus on per capita income, which has drastically reduced post-COVID, and already India ranks 51 on the per capita income list. So adherence is the biggest issue. We expect all patients to be 100% adherence to our medications. But what happens with glaucoma is after 3 months of initial therapy, most of the patients start losing their compliance, and the adherence is very poor. By the way, generic medications are equal in bioequivalence, and their therapeutic equivalence is often assumed to be the same. These are the drugs only included in the NMLS, National List of Essential Medicines, and rather than this acetazolamide, pilocarpine, and timolol, all other drops should be written with generic medication first, name first, followed by the brand name. Initially, before 1992, the rules were little ease off for the companies, but newer rules are a little stricter, which expect the companies to follow, as per the WHO, to follow good manufacturing practice and have the same active ingredient and also the same inactive ones which are listed on the package insert. So that Italy itself has 66% of share of generic latanoprost in 2010 itself. There are many studies which compared both generic and branded drops, like with Xalatan, and in 6 weeks RCT multicenter trial, the IOP lowering effect was similar in both. This review article by Andrew in Journal of Ophthalmology, they also have observed that from 2009, 11.7% glaucoma drugs were prescribed by generic, and it has rose to 55.2% in 2018. And they also observed that they have similar IOP lowering effect. Others, Letital, and also said that the adherence has increased with this generic medications. And ophthalmologists have also started prescribing more drops, generic drops, because of increased similar efficacy of both generic and branded ones was observed by Dagatas et al. In their contrast study. And the second drop were less needed in generic arm with a large 6,000 patient study by Kimitar. So I'd summarize saying that all these literature observations suggest that generic medications are similar in bioequivalence, and they are affordable and easily available. and they also result in improved adherence and compliance, leading to a better quality of life.
Scientific committee for
Now it's
inviting
open for
me
discussion.
on this debate, which is SLT versus medications for early and primary open angle
Could you mute yourself who's talking, because we can't hear? So we'll move on. Have you finished, or you need to finish?
Thank
Because
you.
we've crossed the time. So please stop sharing your screen, and we move on to the chairperson and convener for your pick on the generic and versus the branded. I move on to the chairperson. Dr. Braganza, are you here? Dr. Andrew? Are you here? Dr. Andrew is not here. Okay, then we'll move on to Dr. Meenakshi. Could you take your pick on the...
I would prefer to not take the generic because especially the things that he pointed out very clearly, that the medication has to be used lifelong, and there can be side effects which can emerge. So one has to keep in mind, and if due to economic considerations one does use the generic, one should have a close follow-up that whether it is efficacious or not, or if the side effects are causing any harm to the patient.
Perfect. So we'll move on to the two Dr. Singhs. Could you quickly give your opinion in one line each so that
we have done analysis of about 500 eye drops, generic as well as proprietary. The drop size varies from 23 microliter to 70 microliter. So imagine a bottle may give you 18 drops per ml, and other good bottles might give you 35 to 40 drops per ml. So one 3 ml bottle may contain more than 100 drops, or it may contain only 50 to 60 drops. Second is, if you look at the architecture of the bottle, so in a lot of time you see you press the bottle and 3-4 drops are dispensed. That will increase the wastage factor. So you look at the drop size, look at the wastage factor. These are imponderables which are other than the cost of drug itself. So it is not only the cost of drug which impacts the economics of the drug usage, but the size of the drop dispensation. So some generic drugs may actually have a smaller drop size also. So you have to look for yourself which generic medications they have dispense a small drop size, they're economical in the long term. All generic medicines may not be economical in the long term because of this drop size and these issues, plus efficacy issues.
Yeah, right. We actually cannot generalize. Dr. Manavdeep, would you just like to say one sentence before
I think all of both the speakers have been absolutely right that there are so many factors. So you need to individually check each and every brand for yourself if it is a generic medicine, that which is okay. You have to assess individual drugs, individual brands, individual generic brands, I mean.
Perfect. That's absolutely perfect. We cannot generalize. We have to look at the merit of the individual drug. So with that, we move on to the next debate. That is, I would like to treat all ocular hypertensives. And for this, we have another 10 minutes, 4 minutes each, and then discussion. Dr. Sandhya, could you please share your screen?
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Yeah, carry on.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank AAOS for giving me this opportunity. So first of all, the topic given it to me is I would treat all OHT versus I would not treat every OHT. So coming to the definition of OHT, intraocular pressure higher than 21 millimeter mercury with normal optic nerve and normal visual field. So the main reason why I would like to treat all OHT is OHT itself is a huge risk factor for POAG. And one of the main studies which has given us the guidelines for treatment is OHTS. It has shown that ocular hypotensive medication is effective in delaying or preventing the onset of POAG in individuals with OHT. And the results of OHTS has shown that among participants who has taken treatment, 60% reduction in the development of POAG. And at the end of 5 years of OHTS study, the development of POAG was 4.4% in the medication group and 9.5% in the observation group. I would also quote another study that is quantifying the effect of IOP reduction on the occurrence of glaucoma. This was a study where meta-analysis of 9 ocular hypertension and 1 POAG was identified. And the results have shown that among the results compared of 9 ocular hypertension trials, it gave a pooled relative risk of 0.61 with 95% of confidence interval. A meta-regression based on the outcome of 9 ocular hypertension studies has shown that decrease of the relative risk of glaucoma conversion by 14% with each of extra IOP reduction. So one more important point I would like to say is diurnal variation test. Most of the recommended guidelines for OHT treatment has been categorized into low risk, medium risk, and high risk. But in our practice, most of us will perform only 1 or 2 random readings and will start the treatment for them. And most of us fail to perform DVT as a routine. So another point which I would like to say is poor glaucoma follow-ups. Whenever we see in our practice, when the eye pressure is high and we ask the patient to come for repeat IOP checkup, they fail to come for follow-ups, and basic investigations cannot be performed. Some can't afford, and some of them believe that they don't have any eye problems and they don't have any noticeable visual changes. Another factor is cost. Earlier, anti-glaucoma medications were very expensive and they could not afford, and they were not using for longer durations. But now many Indian companies have started producing at an affordable price. So I feel cost is no longer an issue in treating OHT like before. And last but not the least, ocular hypertension when left untreated can lead to retinal vein occlusions, which can in turn cause secondary glaucomas, which leads to sight-threatening neovascular glaucomas. And as in OHTS study, there is an observation that at 10-year cumulative incidence of retinal vein occlusion was 2.1% in the observation group and 1.4% in the medication group. So I would like to conclude based on several studies and my own experience that ocular hypertension therapy reduces the risk of conversion to glaucoma. The risk reduction is with greater IOP reduction. Hence, I would treat all OHT patients. Thank you.
Dr. Chandrima, you're muted.
Dr. Shivani, can you share your screen, please?
Yes, ma'am. So a very good afternoon. At the outset, I would like to thank AIOS Scientific Committee for giving me this opportunity. So I am of the opinion that not all cases of ocular hypertension need treatment. We know that it is a condition when the intraocular pressure is more than 2 standard deviation above the population mean, with open angles on endoscopy, and there are no detectable visual field or optic disc changes. So just briefing about the landmark OATH study here. This study included eyes with IOP ranged between 24 to 32 millimeters of mercury. And the objectives of phase 1 of the study were to determine the safety and efficacy of topical ocular hypotensive medications in delaying or preventing the development of POAG, and also to determine the factors that predict which patients with ocular hypertension will develop POAG. Now, at 13 years, the cumulative incidence of POAG was found to be 22% in the observation group and 16% in the medication group. So this graph does signify the importance of starting early treatment. But let's have a closer look at the statistics. So the participants were divided into 3 groups, the ones with low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And as we can see here, there was no significant difference in the incidence of POAG between the medication group and the observation group. However, this difference was significant in the high-risk group. Now, these are the cumulative probability plots of developing POAG in the 3 groups. What is interesting here is to highlight that the number needed to be treated to prevent 1 case of POAG was 98 eyes in the low-risk group. Now, this is a high number. Also, we need to consider the local and systemic side effects of the anti-glaucoma medications, not to forget about the cost burden of these medications, especially in a developing country like ours, and the inconvenience that comes with daily dosing. We know that glaucoma patients who instill anti-glaucoma medications suffer from ocular surface diseases as well. So we need to consider the patient's health status and life expectancy, and also individual's own risk of developing primary open-angle glaucoma with time. Low-risk ocular hypertensives can be followed without medication. high-risk ocular hypertensives benefit from more frequent follow-ups and early treatment. Of course, we need to consider the personal preference of the patient as well, so whether he wants to come for regular follow-ups or is more comfortable with early treatment option. So the risk factors for progression of ocular hypertension to POAG, as mentioned by Oates study, were ocular pressure at presentation, older age of the patient, a higher vertical cup disc ratio, a greater pattern standard deviation on visual field, and central corneal thickness being a strong predictor of progression. To mention here that family history of glaucoma is also an important consideration in clinical practice, though it was not mentioned amongst the old risk factors. We know that thinner CCT is associated with high risk of progression to POAG, and we need to assess the risk and benefits before offering the treatment to patient, and of course, to signify the importance of regular follow-ups. I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that would you prefer to instill an eye drop daily for your lifetime for a disease you may never have? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shivani. Over to you, chairpersons and conveners. Dr. Meenakshi will take your
yeah, I think both the presenters presented very well, and they've each brought out, and I feel that the risk-benefit ratio has to be evaluated for each patient before putting them onto a medication. And as far as the cost is concerned, actually, if you try to analyze, the drop per cost is very less. So we talk a lot about medications being very expensive, but if we drop it down to daily cost, it's actually not so high. And we need to keep all the factor that she brought in about having vascular occlusions or AION needs to be remembered, and thus we should evaluate case by case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Singh?
We all know that glaucoma is basically an asymptomatic disease. A lot of people won't know they have glaucoma. It's only we who tell them glaucoma. And they start feeling its symptoms start appearing when you start the treatment actually. So numbers needed to treat is 20 for ocular hypertension. That means we have to treat 20 patients to prevent one patient from developing glaucoma, which is a high cost. So I think it makes sense to treat the patients who are at risk. For example, one-eyed patients with glaucoma in other eye, strong family history of glaucoma is there, and maybe in the higher ranges. And I think what you all require is a close follow-up of the patient. Not every patient needs to be treated, despite the lower cost of drugs that we see today.
Absolutely, that should be the take-home message, that the risk factors need to be weighed before starting treatment. We'll have one last sentence from you, Dr. Manavdeep.
I agree with Dr. Gurustinder that we have to individualize all this and see. Of course, we usually treat every pressure above 27, whether there's glaucoma development or not. But less than that, we have to individualize. And I've seen patients who are under my follow-up for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they have not developed glaucoma. So follow-up is the key to all this success.
Wonderful. We have 1.5 minutes left. So I'll just ask the chairpersons and conveners that how would you rate pilocarpine in today's modern world? A plethora of drugs, actually.
I actually do use pilocarpine in certain situations. Of course, angle chlor, it's a well-known fact that you can use them, and they do pretty well in aphakic patients. Because these are the drugs which target the facility of aqueous outflow through the trabecular meshwork. We know that the POAG is a disease of the outflow pathway. It's not a disease of inflow. So actual most, like physiological thing to do in these patients is to increase the trabecular outflow, which these drugs do perfectly well. So I think pilocarpine does have its role, and certainly in aphakic patients, and maybe some old patients also, because the effects of accommodation are seen in in young patients only.
I said, Dr. Chandrima, I said in my talk itself, when nothing works, nothing works, it's a pilocarpine which works. So I have used it as a fourth drug, fifth drug, and effective at that stage.
Yes, and just to give the take-home message on the glaucoma subspecialty day, that do remember pilocarpine when you've done a PI and still your patient has problems and there's a plateau iris. That's when you need to remember pilocarpine and put your patient on pilocarpine.
Or use it as a fifth-line drug.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we are right there. Thank you very much, Dr. Amit and the scientific committee, scientific chair, Dr. Partho, and the entire scientific team. You're doing a great job. Thank you very much once again. And thank you all.
Thank you for a beautiful session.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrima, for conducting the session well.